I fell in love on my Venus line, astrocartography. You can too, not only once, but many times. And I'm excited to share with you today. This is VerDarLuz from Astrocartography with VerDarLuz, our podcast episode dedicated this week to love, relationships, and all things Venus. So Venus is the goddess of love. She is Aphrodite. She is the goddess of romance as well as the attractive principle in all of us. So on Venus lines, we can also attract sometimes money, aesthetics, and beauty, be really enamored with the culture or the nature of a location. And we can have a stronger social life. And by extension, we can call in more money or also more and deeper relationships. And so what I want to share with you today in this podcast and video is some maps of my various Venus lines around the world, Venus rising, Venus setting, and also talk about a very famous chart. First name is B. Rad, like Brad, and talk about his Venus lines. And it's a really striking example of Venus in a famous chart. But I have so many stories of this in my own life, and I'm excited to share with you. But I also want to bust some myths about just going to a Venus line and just finding love. And it's not just that simple. Love is always more complicated. And Venus activates naturally for all of us romance and harmony and, like we said, potentially money and even art. But she has an entire story in your own birth chart. Venus has aspects to other planets. She's in relationships to other planets. You know, if you're watching the stage and the scene of your life taking place with Venus, she's got other actors there. And so whenever you go to a Venus line, you have to consider the other actors. And you have to consider what costume that she's in. That would be what sign she's in. Because you're going to play that role even stronger in that location. And also Venus is in a house, an area of life, and she rules houses. And all of those themes will become more dominant for you when you go to a Venus line. So I'm going to share some of the maps here and start getting into it. And just to share that, we have a lot of different desires for partnership, right? We have different things that we want to attract in a relationship. One of the things that is really important is that we consider that maps are one part of relocation astrology, but also we have to actually look at a relocated chart. And I want to show you this chart first, and then we're going to look at the maps, because without understanding the relocated chart, we actually miss a huge part of the equation. I'm going to talk to you about Denver, Colorado, because Denver is a very important place for me. And Venus is just 2 degrees away from my rising sign. So it's going to be very strong. But you also see that Neptune is 4 degrees away from my descendant, 17 to 21. And that's also important because when a planet is on the angle of partnership, it's going to affect all the relationships in our life. So that's very significant. We don't just look for Venus lines. We also look for planets that are on the angle of partnership to tell us what kinds of relationships we're going to attract in a particular location. So obviously relationships are a big theme for me in Denver because I have a Venus line and then I have a planet on the angle of partnership, even some asteroids. So let me show you the maps and I'll tell you what happened in Denver. So if I come to the map here, give me 1 second. And for those on the podcast, I'll try my best to explain what we're seeing here. We have a Venus line that is really significant in terms of being just 2 degrees away, like I said. Venus is rising. And There are 4 angles in astrology: rising and setting. Rising is your personality, your outer mask. Setting is partnerships, relationships. Venus could also be, and one of the other angles is career, midheaven. And then also the IC, the opposite of that, is the angle of the home. And any one of those Venus lines can attract relationships into our life, but there's a different flavor with them. When Venus is rising, we can be embodying or exuding more of that Venus quality. And this was a place where I first started DJing and I played more live music, and Venus rules the arts, like we said. That was one expression of that. I also wrote my books along this line. And Venus is in Gemini for me, the sign of the writer, the messenger, the communicator. I also taught some workshops. I lived there for 10 years, but within the first 6 months of living there, actually it was the first 3 months, I attracted a relationship at a festival that I was teaching at. And this is actually a theme for me in different places in the world. Because I have Venus in Gemini in my first house as a Gemini rising, there is a quality when I teach that, I attract through information. And that is something that's happened on this line. I met this partner at a festival where I was teaching astrology embodied, and she was also a dancer. And so when we came together within the first month, we really hit it off right away at the festival. And second of all, we decided to do a hand fasting ceremony. And if you haven't heard of hand fasting, it's a kind of commitment ceremony from the pagan world. But of course, Venus rules love. Aphrodite rules love. She rules marriage as well. And so this is kind of a marriage ceremony, but it's for a year and a day. And we agreed to create this project called Behold Beloved. I was working on music and she was working on dance and choreography. And we choreographed some of my music pieces to tell a story. I think about 9 songs we did, some live, some, really intense dance pieces, some with guitar. And it was really the whole story of love and partnership and relationship. And it was one of the greatest, artistic endeavors and experiences of my life. And I'm so grateful for that experience. But it also tunes into what I said with Neptune. Neptune is also a planet of the arts, the imagination, and spirituality, and also mythology and storytelling. And so along that Neptune line and Venus line, this was really prominent for me with this partnership. And it came within the first couple months of me being there. And I point that out because I was so strong on that Venus line. So if you have more space away from it, it could take some time to build out that theme of love in your life. But if you're very close to that line, within 1 or 2 or 3 degrees, it might happen very quickly. And this is really important. And something else that happened really quickly, if I go back to the maps, is that even though I wasn't living there, I attracted a partner from this part of Texas, right around Dallas, a little bit to the west. And we're again looking at this Venus rising line. I didn't have to go there. She and I met in Portland, Oregon at another festival where I have met quite a few partners. And it was a Alex Gray art event. And within the first days of meeting each other, there was a really strong magnetism. And we ended up working together as well on art project where she was taking my photography and putting it into her fashion design. And so I was literally wearing my art, which is Venus rising. It's on my rising, on my body, my personality, my outer self. That's the rising sign. So that was really, really powerful. And we had this 9-month relationship and made a lot of art together. And so again, another symbol of how Venus can bring relationships into our life. So I want to talk about for a moment that we also have many different kinds of relationships. And some of us are in same-sex partnerships, trans partnerships, everything. And the thing that's really important is that, let's say we're two men and we're also wanting to find love and partnership. It might not be Venus that is the planet of love. It may actually be the sun or Mars, because those are masculine symbols. And so if we're a man and we're interested in men, or also for women interested in men, we may find that the sun or Mars might be also very, very important in terms of locational astrology and finding partnership. So I wanted to point that out. I'm bisexual myself. I have, found different energies. Venus has been very strong for me for attracting relationships, especially with the feminine. But Sun and Mars, there's been masculine energies as well. Now, what about a famous chart? Why don't we talk about a very famous chart? Everyone knows this actor. I think he's a very great actor myself. I love his work. And it's Brad Pitt. And I want to show you his maps and then talk about just briefly what we're seeing here. So let me scroll, and we're going to talk about Brad was born in Shawnee, Oklahoma. And we're looking at a different set of lines now. And for everyone on the podcast, there's these kind of, crazy lines that are going in all directions. They're actually called local space lines. And local space lines are energy lines. They're the directions of the planets when we were born. So for Brad, let's say, if you pointed in the direction of Venus, and in this case, the moon as well, they would be arcing over. It goes from Santa Fe, Albuquerque, all the way over Los Angeles. Really, really close. So that means it's like that planet is emanating, it's infusing locations over that local space line. You could think of these like personal feng shui lines, and they're very, very important. I have my own story I'll share next with you. Well, of course, we know that Brad has attracted his long-term partners that he had, Angelina Jolie and Jennifer Aniston, both in Hollywood. He met Angelina Jolie on set. I think it was for Meet Joe Black. So he met in that location. Actually, those partners were from that location. Remember, we said in my own life too, people can be from the locations. You don't even have to go there. And so he's very strong on there. And, these were long-term partnerships. Venus is in Capricorn for Brad Pitt, which is a sign of usually committed relationships. Now there was, of course, challenges for Brad, coming out of that relationship with Angelina Jolie. And, it was difficult, but, sometimes Capricorn relationships, there's a lot of responsibility, and they can be quite legalistic at times. So that is something to watch for. There's other things to talk about in Brad's chart for relationship, but just to say that he is an actor earning millions of dollars per film. Venus does rule money, and she does rule the arts, going right over Hollywood. Right? If you're looking at the map, or you could also see that the moon is strong here, and the moon does rule things like family life and domestic life, and so having a home there makes sense. But in terms of Venus, well, these are two feminine symbols, Venus and the moon. And so this is a very strong example of this local space line, this energy line, this directional line attracting relationships for Brad Pitt. Now, this same kind of line, the local space line, is also something that I attracted. And this happened in Europe. And I was selected by the Boom Festival, which is a huge, huge festival. It's like a Burning Man, if you've never heard of it, in a few hours from Lisbon in Portugal. And this was back in 2010. And I just launched my first book. And so I was going to be leading, get the different map up here. And there's Brad. And I'm going to pull up a different map here. So I was leading this workshop that was all about astrology. And it was the beginning of launching my book. And at this event, within like a day of being in Portugal, 2 days being in Portugal, there was a woman that came to my talk, and she was from Portugal, and she also spoke Spanish. And I'm mentioning that because my Venus is in the sign of Gemini. And so I love, I'm very attracted to different cultures, people from different cultures and backgrounds. And I'm also really attracted to speaking Spanish. I've lived in Spain the last few years. Actually, I've lived on this Venus line um, in Andalusia. But you know, just I've lived in Spanish speaking parts of the world, and I actually appreciate speaking Spanish more than I do English. And I'm bringing this up because I attracted someone there who I got to spend the next week with. We traveled down through southern Portugal and also to Sevilla. We had this experience of being infused in this Venusian way with the jasmine scented flowers at the old palaces in Sevilla. And, it was really kind of romantic that way. And I ended up writing a lot of stories and poems during that time. I've never had such a concentrated experience as I did during that time. Venus is in Gemini, the sign of the messenger, the writer. And the stories were mostly like love related. They were about partnerships. I still think they're some of the best stories I've written. The other thing is that on this line, not only did I teach, but I sold a lot of my books. I ended up doing readings. I earned back money, and I ended up coming back to Lisbon in, I think it was 2018, to teach at a digital nomad conference. And once again, I taught about these themes, and I also attracted relationships that were business partnerships, and I did some work there. And so I also made money on that Venus line. So just to say, relationships and money can often be coming to you on a Venus line. And it's definitely a place I want to live again or travel to again. And good places to have a Venus line. So lastly, for my own chart, I want to point out Venus on the descendant. And I'm going to do this by showing you a couple different softwares that I use. This is another software called Sirius, and it's called the Treasure Maps. And I want to bring this up too, because this is one that we could use for weddings, honeymoons, or anniversaries, or just a really great trip you want to have with a beloved. Now, some of us might be wedding planners, and we are doing destination weddings. It's becoming a lot more popular. And Venus lines would be one of the best lines to look at for wedding planners. Of course, we want to look at the whole chart of each person. And ideally, we'd have very strong Venus aspects or Venus on the angles or local space lines for each of the partners. And the same thing would be for a honeymoon or an anniversary. Now, these treasure maps, where the red is the strongest, is where it's the most dynamic, and maybe energy would happen more fast, or you'd see the theme come up really strong. And in this part of southern Thailand, where I was in Koh Phangan, I've been to Thailand a few times, but I had a very, very strong connection. And I also was with a partner when I visited this place. So I had a relationship coming in that was beautiful. Then I also attracted a relationship, but also I immediately met this partner who again spoke Spanish. There was that kind of love energy and attraction energy. And within the first week I was there, I went to the ecstatic dance, and I ended up meeting some of the dance organizers, and I started doing the dances. I ended up playing my Turkish instrument at a dance and DJ'd a dance. Well, that is also because Venus is on the angle of partnership for me here. And I'm going to show that in a different map. And this would be back in my solar maps, just to get more specific so you can see this. All right. So here it is. The biggest city near Kopangan is Suratani over here. And Kosabui is here too. And it happened very quickly within the first week. And I'm pointing this out again because this is to signify that actually Venus is only 3 degrees from my angle of partnership in this part of the world. And here's why we have to consider relocated charts when we do locational astrology, because you might not see how close it is on the maps. Here is Venus on the angle of partnership here. And so one last thing I'll share is that I know a lot of people like to work with what's called Astro.com, one of the most famous softwares that anyone can access online. And what I want to show to you with this is that we have to be a little bit careful with using Astro.com because we might not get all the information that we want. So let's do this. We're going to share this screen and you're going to see the maps here. And this is again Thailand for me. When you first come in, you're not going to see anything checked, harmonious aspects or disharmonious aspects. You might have to check those if you want the full story. And you have to make sure to read the details on the sign here, ask for them. But what you don't see is you don't know how close that Venus descendant line is. But what you actually don't see is that you don't know the story of my Venus, that there's an opposition with Neptune, sextile to Saturn. So you don't get the full story of what's happening with that here. And that's why I always suggest to people, even though the maps are incredible because they're Google Maps, right? We could keep going in even tighter, which I love. That's why I use 3 softwares when I do my readings. But I just want to point out that you won't have the story of that planet in your chart. So if you have a square to Pluto or a challenge with Saturn to your Venus, you're not going to get that story. So all of that being said, if you are choosing a place to go on wedding, for a destination wedding or a honeymoon or an anniversary or just a beautiful lover's vacation, you definitely want to know where your Venus lines are. Or if you're just really ready to fall in love. Yeah. But we want to understand how you're working with your Venus in your chart. That's really important. And that's what I help clients with when we do locational astrology readings. And we can look at not only Venus lines, but any other lines and planets associated with partnerships, like your 7th house, like your Juno, and all these other relational symbols. So if that's you, I'd love to connect with you. You can hit me up. There's links in the descriptions below. And there's going to be some other videos here, like where you can expand the most, where you can be the most inspired, where you can experience fortune and opportunities. We love that. It's Jupiter. And I have many stories from my own life with Jupiter. So it's been great to serve you with this reading today, this session, this video, this podcast. Thanks for tuning in, however you have, and definitely tune in again for our next episode of Astrocartography. Find your power places with VerDarLuz. All the best. Happy trails. May love descend and shower its grace upon you.